just in a few seconds. Hello and good afternoon from Islamabad to all friends who have joined us on this webinar. It's being organized as a sideline event on the 50th session of United Nations Human Rights Council by World Muslim Congress in collaboration with Kashmir Institute of International Relations. Today's subject, which we have chosen, is the impending genocide of Kashmiri Muslims. As we have a very good panel who have been working on the subject for a very long time. Robert Vitana is a writer, is a human rights defender. He has extensively worked on the issue of Palestine and more recently on Kashmir. Mary Sikuli is a writer and human rights defender from United States. Mary is always on heels for the rights of the oppressed people, be it Kashmiris, Palestinians, or Rohingyas, or anywhere else in the world. And most recently, we saw her very active on Ukraine problem also. And we are very proud to have Phil Bennon, former MEP from the United Kingdom, Professor Dr. Vikas Ali Kausar, who is head of Department Public Policy and Governance at National University of Modern Languages in Islamabad. And we will be shortly joined by Barrister Nadia Salam. So today's our subject to discuss is the impending genocide of Muslims of Indian occupied Kashmir. As we all know, genocide alert soon after the abrogation of Article 370 by way of the Indian Constitution. The watch issued a genocide alert on Kashmir and also for the Muslims of India, more importantly in the Assam. And what he classified at that time is India has already classed the 8 states of genocide. Now only the 2 states have left. What the Indian state has done after the re-election of the Modi government in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, soon after its re-election, on one hand, they abrogated the Article 370 and 35A in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And on the other side, in India, they enacted the legislation is like Citizenship Amendment Bill. It all was for the exclusion of Muslims in India. So the way the current Indian regime is dealing with the minorities in India, be it Muslims, be it Christians, be it Dalits and others, it seems the majoritarian rule in India is pursuing genocide of its minorities. So today we will talk about more on Kashmir. As we have seen in Kashmir for the last 33 years, the Indian state has used all the state apparatus to demonize the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir by a regime of human rights violations, be that enforced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, innocent killings and extrajudicial executions, rape used as a weapon of war, demolition of properties, and other things. But soon after this abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, the main play of the Indian government was to make a demographic shift in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir so that the Muslim majority state be turned into a Muslim minority state. For that purpose, they enacted some series of laws over there. That's we see the change in the domicile law, and the new domicile law was enacted instead of the state subject law, which paved the way for the Indians to have the state subjects or the domiciles in Indian occupied Kashmir to secure jobs there, to have land there, and other facilities which a citizen enjoys. Unfortunately, these all things are in a way where to crush the people's struggle through this legal warfare by the Indian state. More recently, we have seen the Indian state has also established one of the delimitation commissions, which was which presented this report, is another way of disempowering the Muslims in Kashmir. On one hand, they are disempowering the Muslims of Kashmir. We will be discussing in next webinar this delimitation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But today we will focus on the genocide which is taking place in occupied Kashmir. Not only now, it has been there for a long time. We have seen one huge massacre of the Kashmiri Muslims took place in 1947, but from 1989 till date, we have seen nearly 19 massacres took place in Kashmir in 1 month. More recently, the Indian government, through its agencies, again, like in the 90s when they planned and had a conspiracy to shift the Hindu population, Kashmiri Pandit population from Kashmir Valley to the other parts of Kashmir and India, so that it could pave the way for the Indian army to crush the freedom struggle and demolish all the Muslim structures in Kashmir. What they did from 1989 till this date. And more recently, when we see after this abrogation, some people came to Kashmir, they were having jobs there. Now the Indian agencies again has the conspiracy because India fails through all its means to crush the people's will. But now again, some target killings of some non-Muslims and Muslims took place in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is also seen as a Indian conspiracy to force the non-Muslim population to leave Kashmir so that Indian army can make its inroads in the Muslim population and to kill the Kashmiri youth, to put them behind the bars. There's already hundreds and thousands of Kashmiri youth are behind the bars facing terrorism charges on one way or the other. And similarly, most recently, we have seen the Indian court's verdict against the prominent Kashmiri leader, Mohammad Yasin Malik, sentencing him 2 times life imprisonment in a fake and concocted case, which they call terror funding case. So we'll be discussing all this. I'll straight away go to Mary Security, who has been looking all on this and has running the social media campaigns, especially for what is happening in Kashmir and what has been happening. She has been very much critical of the Modi government's policies in Kashmir and the Indian Home Minister Amit Shah and others. Mary, you have the floor.
Okay, good morning to all of you. Yes, I was very glad to see that you had entitled this session, The Impending Genocide in Indian Occupied Kashmir, because the Indian government has worked tirelessly to change the narrative of Kashmiris and their supporters from describing it as a colonial genocide to turning the table and turning it into Kashmiri Muslim violence and genocide against Kashmiri Hindus. They want to turn the narrative into a terrorism, Kashmiri Muslim terrorism, and communal violence. And so they've worked tirelessly by eliminating all Kashmiri voices from social media, by terrorizing Kashmiris in diaspora who have family in Kashmir so that they're not free to speak out, and by closing down Kashmir. Really, it's a telecommunications blackout as severe as August, as they imposed in August 2019. So genocide is defined in international law and by the UN, and it's distinguished. They parse out, to me, in invalid ways, they parse out genocide from ethnic cleansing. To my mind, there's really no difference, and the primary purpose of all of this legalistic approach to what genocide is to put a framework on it so that we no longer understand what qualifies as genocide. It took the United States several years up until recently to even characterize what happened to the Rohingya as genocide. It was only a matter of months ago when the whole world knew it was genocide. What's happening to Palestinians and Kashmiris is a different form of genocide, but it is that. It fits every legal definition by international law. And I believe in many ways that these governments, including those on the United Nations Human Rights Council, they use these legal definitions to justify their inaction against genocide, and to prioritize these legalistic definitions rather than to prioritize the lived experience of those who are undergoing and sustaining genocide: Palestinians, Kashmiris, and Rohingya, and other peoples. And I think it's important for us to center once again the lived experience of Kashmiris, that what they're undergoing is genocide. I know that now India thinks that it has Kashmiris pretty much where they want them, where they're silenced, and where they now control the narrative, with human rights activists like Kurram Parvez, Yasin Malik, and many others, with journalists, with political activists, with thousands of stone pelters and protesters in jail. India now controls the narrative. And so when you go onto social media, it's a field day. The Kashmiri zone police come on every day talking about the latest Queso operation, where so-called terrorists were killed. And when we know that they were young Kashmiri men who were extrajudicially executed, where neighborhoods were terrorized, property vandalized, homes searched, people assaulted, people jailed. After the recent protests against the verdict for the sentencing of Yasin Malik, they went on nighttime raids and hauled in, just in the first few hours, 10 more young men to jail. So yes, it's genocide, which includes extrajudicial executions on an almost daily basis, terrorizing neighborhoods, unemployment, massive unemployment, forced disappearance, and mass incarceration. So yes, it is a genocidal situation in Kashmir. It is not terrorism. It is not communal violence of Muslims against Pandits. And it's very alarming, and particularly because we have the collusion, the open public collusion of some of the very member countries on the United Nations Human Rights Council, including Russia, which has arms India against, brags about it, against the Kashmiri freedom struggle. The United States, which has formed a cartel with Israel, Dubai, and India, and also arms the Indian movements against the Kashmiri freedom struggle. So these countries are colluding with India to cover for them, because the war on terror ideology, this anti-Muslim colonial ideology, which justifies war, occupation, and genocide and the persecution of Muslims, this is the main weapon in the arsenal today. And so it's really important that they buttress and support India's narrative for Kashmir. But it makes our work that much more important, because even Kashmiris in diaspora are not free to speak. And we suffer no consequences except being thrown off social media. So it's very important that we speak out and say the things, tell the truth about the genocide against Kashmiris, and explain what they would say if they were not shot at, executed, terrorized, and imprisoned for saying. So I'm really glad that you entitled this session, The Impending Genocide. Actually, it's the ongoing genocide. um, and think it's very important that we control the narrative, that we allow Kashmiri voices to be heard, that they believe their lived experience is that of genocide, and that fits every criteria laid out in international law. So I'm glad to be part of this, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
Thank you, Mary, for your very wonderful and elaborative presentation on the situation in occupied Kashmir, India, Palestine, Rohingya, and around, and the international cartels who are helping the oppressors for crushing the freedom struggles in the different regions. From a human rights activist, I will now move to a politician, Philip Bannon, is former MEP and is a good friend of Kashmir. He has been many times in United Nations Geneva and other forums speaking for the rights of people of Kashmir in European Parliament, and now always in the United Kingdom in different forms, in different functions. So, Phil, I invite your contribution.
Yes, thank you. I welcome the comments of the last speaker, and particularly regarding the question of whether we are quite at genocide yet, or if it is actually still impending. Now, the Rome Statutes, the international law on genocide, is very, very broad, and it does include measures to alter the balance of a population, for instance. So this is not just an academic question just now. I think it is a real legal question. I'm not certain one way or the other if we've actually reached that stage in Kashmir, because I think we've certainly had human rights abuses right the way through since 1989, and they've been stepped up by different Indian governments, particularly with the acts to bring in impunity for the armed forces, so that and giving them shoot to kill rights, and that's many years ago. So we certainly can't blame the Modi government for that one. And of course, I think the big question now is the Indian government planning something something that is actually on a bigger scale? Now, looking at the evidence, I would say that they probably are. The revocation of autonomy, for instance, went along with it. A change in the migration laws regarding Kashmir, and in both of these changes are really very clearly something that would be required by the Modi government if they were actually planning to do exactly what I've just suggested, and that is change the population balance. And the internet shutdown has been referred to. Of course, if there's no social media, if there's no connection to the outside world by the people who are the residents and the people who are living there, then it's very difficult for the global media. And considering that the United Nations were not even there at the time, and both Amnesty and Human Rights Watch were left, it was extremely difficult to see what was going on. And again, this is the sort of approach that you might get from a repressive regime. Am I still on, Altaf? Because I can't see you.
I'm here.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll carry on. So I think that those changes are really significant. I know that Modi has also talked about encouraging what he calls pandits to go back. Now, I would not necessarily object to Hindus who were originally from Kashmir going back if it was of their own free choice and it was what they wanted to do. If we are getting inducements from the Indian government then that is a very worrying thing. So I think with all of these factors going on, I think we have to suspect that something bigger is being planned by the Modi government. And considering our attention is elsewhere, particularly with what's going on with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's very often when attention is elsewhere that that authoritarians act, and because they feel that they've got a better chance of getting away with it. So I think the global community, in terms of the human rights activists, the human rights defenders, politicians, we all need to keep one eye on what's going on, because I think there's a very, very good chance that Modi's planning something significant in terms of certainly of population movements. We've got a Congress coming up in Sofia next month. We have put an amendment into one of the resolutions heavily criticizing the Indian government for not wanting to come to the table and talk about this matter in the international framework. With that, I'll hand over, and I'm hoping that you've been able to hear me, because I seem to have lost contact with the panel. Okay, thank you, Altaf. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill, for your contribution. As you rightly said, the Indian government is not only thinking, but they are implementing those things which is in a way ongoing genocide in Kashmir. On one way, the way what we talked about the state subject laws by that way, and empowering the Indian army to take the land, and empowering the Indians to have the jobs in Kashmir, and making huge Kashmir, changing Kashmir into a real estate, then giving lots of people, lots of consortiums from around India and abroad to have the real estates in Kashmir. This is in a way to make Kashmiris homeless, landless, and jobless. So
yeah, I did actually mean to mention the action against journalists as well, where they've actually been locking up editors, locking up respected journalists under the 2-year detention rules, which again is another sign that something bigger is going on. Thanks.
Yeah, none of the journalists in Kashmir can write anything about the human rights violations of Kashmir or anything going on about the freedom struggle, because all the newspapers are censored. If anybody dares to write, he is booked under Unlawful Prevention Activities Act, for which he can be sentenced either to life imprisonment or to the death penalty. This is what they are misusing the anti-terror laws, the Indian government, against the human rights defenders. As you know, one of the famous human rights defenders of Kashmir, who is internationally recognized, Khurram Parvez, has been booked under these notorious laws. And today we will remember another journalist of Kashmir, Dr. Shujat Bukhari, who was killed in 4 years ago on the same day. He was also a vocal voice for the people of Kashmir and a patriotic Kashmiri. From that, I will now move to a historian, a writer who has been documenting all these conflicts and this history of these conflicts, and also the struggles going on. Robert Fitana, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good day to everyone. It's a privilege to be here today with such distinguished experts, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. Much of the world community continues to ignore and, as Ms. Scully mentioned, even support the shocking human rights abuses that the government of India and many Indians are committing against the people of Kashmir. As they've done so often before, many governments of the world overlook violations of international law, human rights abuses, and crimes against humanity if addressing them or even acknowledging them might jeopardize their power and profits. India is a powerful country, and the leaders of many other nations will not address its many abuses. Some of these issues have been discussed today. Mr. Benyon alluded to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which gives so-called law enforcement personnel in Kashmir the right to commit any act against a Kashmiri with complete impunity. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act is described within the act as, quote, an act to enable certain special powers to be conferred upon members of the armed forces in disturbed areas. This one sentence is worth looking at in some detail. Those special powers are extremely broad, including being unlimited. Soldiers and police officers harass, arrest, beat, incarcerate, and kill Kashmiris with little or no provocation and no accountability.
Yes.
The idea of Kashmir being a disturbed area also needs further explanation. It is only disturbed because of decades-long Indian brutality and interference. I refer to lack of accountability. The act includes the following statement, quote, "No prosecution, suit, or other legal proceeding shall be instituted except with the previous sanction of the central government against any person in respect of anything done or purported to be done in exercise of the powers conferred by this act." So Indian soldiers and police officials who as people support the Modi party and hatred towards Muslims are given free rein to torture and kill them with complete impunity. A report from March of this year, an investigation by Stoke White, an international law firm, and reported by the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research, discussed Indians' crimes in Kashmir. The following findings were reported for a period of 1 year: 450 cases of torture, 100 cases of enforced disappearance, 1,500 cases of victims, and 30 cases of sexual violence. The report said that these victims are denied any access to justice. And the report further, quote, cautions these testimonies only partially represented the plight of Kashmiris. It was impossible to get a complete picture of Indian atrocities in Kashmir due to the harassment of human rights investigators and restrictions placed on them by the Indian authorities. The report shows that the Indian authorities used domestic legislation ostensibly meant to maintain public order in so-called international counterterrorism campaigns as instruments of suppression and torture of Kashmiris. So the numbers I mentioned above about what has been documented by this organization are simply the tip of the iceberg. It was the information they were able to get. We have to remember that it isn't only human rights investigators who are harassed and restricted. As was mentioned earlier, India suppresses press freedom in Kashmir. In June of 2021, the Indian government approved a new policy in Kashmir, the goal of which was to, quote, ensure a synchronized and effective use of all forms of media to build public trust and foster a genuinely positive image of the government, close quote. Immediately after its release, 129 journalists and media houses in Kashmir expressing their anger at the new policy. This was a very brave and courageous action for them to take because of their immediate arrest and permanent incarceration or execution could result. Genocide can be described very briefly as the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. It involves destroying culture, erasing it and replacing the population and culture with the, quote, dominant group. Is genocide occurring in Kashmir? There can be no doubt that it is, and that the genocidal actions of the Indian government, as Mr. Benyon mentioned, are only going to increase in intensity and brutality. Recently, Indian government officials made derogatory comments about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This has understandably been met with outrage by Muslims throughout India and Kashmir. Peaceful protests against the government for these remarks have been met with deadly violence by Indian authorities. These protests are seen by India and by much of the international community as internal issues. This, of course, is a lie. Additionally, the recent film, The Kashmir Files, stoked the fires of brutal anti-Muslim sentiment in Indian Kashmir. I hear from an acquaintance who is in India, a Muslim living and studying in India. He told me that he and his wife felt safe in the community in which they live. This has changed drastically over the last several days. And he, his wife, and neighbors have experienced harassment that was unheard of during his first couple of years in India. Today, all the important roles in government and industry in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir have been given to Hindus. As of August 5th, 2019, Hindus are now allowed to purchase land in Kashmir and are doing so in record numbers. As Kashmiris lose their employment in order to be replaced by Hindus, they can no longer afford their homes and must sell them. Hindus from India are buying them cheaply, changing the demographic composition of Kashmir. India accepted a United Nations resolution passed in 1948 calling for a plebiscite in Kashmir to exercise the right of self-determination of the people of Kashmir. In the intervening 74 years, India has not allowed this. It is certainly likely that once India has sufficiently oppressed and marginalized the Hindu Muslim population of Kashmir and reduced their numbers to minority status in their own country, it may allow the plebiscite. With Indians as the majority population, it will certainly go the way the current racist government wants it to go. That the international community may deem this legitimate only emphasizes the need for people around the world to act to stop the atrocities that have for generations been committed against the Kashmiri people. We cannot allow these atrocities to go unreported. While the so-called mainstream media mainly ignores them, we must publicize them on social media and independent news outlets. We have a moral obligation and moral responsibility to assist those who are suffering from this brutality. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. You have a very important point about the derogatory remarks and blasphemous remarks by the BJP leaders in India against the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him. This is a malicious design of the Indian government. And others, what the genocidal leader of as the Indian Home Minister, vermin, cockroach, cancer, and microbes. So this is in a way to instigate the Indian Muslims and in the way what the Indian authorities are doing currently, demolishing the properties of those who protested against these blasphemous remarks and caging all those youth and torturing them who used to protest against this. So this is a process which has started in India. Now I will go to Dr. Vikas Ali Kausar. I think he's there. Doctor, you are there?
Yes, I'm here.
Doctor? Yes.
Yes. I'm around, but my video might not work for some.
Okay. I think you have load shedding of electricity
Yes.
this time. So, Dr. Vikas Ali Kausar
Yes.
teaches at the National University of Modern Language, the Public Policy and Governance. He's been working as a very active civil society actor in Azad Kashmir in order to empower the youth of Azad Jammu and Kashmir and also reading the pulse of the youth in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. He has worked closely with the youth on both sides of the line of control. Dr. Vikas Ali, I want to know from you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for having inviting me on this very important area which is of course close to our hearts. I mean, just building what earlier has said, I mean, there are 2-3 important things that we need to understand. That once this unilaterally scrapping or redrawing of geographic boundaries was done, so what was the major argument there of Indian government at that time? That it will bring an economic development in the region and also put an end to armed resistance, or what they called militancy, quote unquote. Now there were 2 competing, I must say, narratives, and there was another alternate narrative coming out from the people of Jammu and Kashmir particularly. And the very nature of that argument was based on the previous experiences of the people and their knowledge, and of course their understanding of the entire conflict, that this is something which is to marginalize local people. This is to doing away with the identity. This is actually to compromise, or maybe I must say this is to not only marginalize but disempower local people from all angles. And of course, when we debate or talk about the genocide, there was a fear, there was always an angle, and in past there has been, I mean, if you see the international definitions of the legal parameters of a genocide, even Even conspiracy to genocide is also a punishable crime. Or if you are planning something on those lines, or if you're planning or plan to commit that thing. So in the context of Kashmir, I guess Kashmiri people particularly have very much understanding that how this thing has entirely unfolded and will unfold. Now, if you see, neither economic development occurred, and nor the armed resistance particularly. I'll come to it in the end, that how these both objectives been achieved. I guess it didn't achieve because the idea behind this entire move and all these doing away with these articles and statehood was basically not only to these were a pair thing, but it was to marginalize, disempower, and making Kashmiris more subservient, and actually trying to not only isolate them, but trying to disempower them economically, socially, politically, and through many other areas. Now, if you see what New Delhi has done after that, they have made sweeping legislative changes and demographic engineering over the period of the time. If we see, they try to introduce new laws. People outside the Kashmir particularly could buy land now, get residency rights. And over the period of time, we have also seen that the people, the marginalized communities, and particularly young people, those who have been alienated from the system, they've also, started resisting more, and it's very much indigenous in nature. We have also seen that even the Kashmiris particularly have been removed from key positions, and the people from the outside has been brought into the administrative positions. And of course, political life, no secret, is there, stand still. Now, on the other side, as earlier speakers have also mentioned, the freedom of movement or expression, I mean, it was already limited there, but the spaces were totally reduced. If you see, most of the separatist or pro-freedom leaders were jailed and are still in the jail. And there was a bigger promise that they would hold the elections and all that, but they've installed a lieutenant governor who is unelected, by the way. And of course, the federal system of India particularly, what they appointed, the person carries the more power, not the local populace or the representatives, whatever they have at the moment. We have also seen that there is a stifling of freedom of speech, crackdown on journalists, social media. So there was a very systematic approach that we have seen that try to choke, the people's voice, try to confine them to at a stage where the desperation occurs. And what happened, particularly this iron hand approach, of course, is backfiring. But over the period of time, we've also seen that young people have no choice but to tread to a more violent path, because you are leaving no space for the young people, particularly political, social, and other spaces. I mean, we've been reading about the economy and all other things that have also been compromised and severely in loss. If we also see that there is important thing that we also could notice, that over the period of time that the law enforcement agencies, particularly post this phenomena of doing away with Article 370 and 35, they become more emboldened. If we see, I mean, even the people are not allowed to have the last rights of their relatives, even the political leaderships, all these things, their last rights are not performed and not allowed, actually. Their relatives or the public is not allowed. So this is all indication of something, that society is angry. One, people are not reconciling. Two, third, then the state is using iron hand to not only stifle the freedom of expression, but to close all the possible doors of peaceful movement, and pushing people at the end of the day to the verge that they turn towards the violent path. And this helps them, countering them under the larger banner of terrorism or militancy and all that. I mean, it's very open secret the way there is a suppression of civil rights. I mean, over the period of time, what we have seen, that even the State Human Rights Commission, with at that time, I guess 8,000 more pending cases on regarding very alarming human rights cases. That commission was closed, And if this all is an indication that you are trying to give legitimacy to your forces. They had, of course, impunity, political impunity. Now you are giving them every sort of social, political, every sort of impunity to go against the local populace. Even you go for the delimitation commission. I mean, it's unprecedented that you are creating new constituencies based on, I mean, it's religiously you are trying to divide people, and that happened in past. But we have seen that this is on the basis of population. But the way blatantly it has been done, that you are trying to reduce the Muslim constituencies and expanding the constituencies of other religion, that is not going to work in Kashmir. Particularly Kashmir is if it's a multilingual, multi-ethnic society, but people are very much there. They are from the century, and you cannot divide and isolate people based on these things. And of course, besides everything, there's a political agenda of the BJP that they try to establish and enforce there. At the end, just I would like to say one thing. I mean, if you see, BJP has, the government has published a document in past, I guess 70, 80 pages document, and where after this abrogation of Article 370, and in their achievements, I mean, one of the achievement was that they have issued around 4 million domicile certificates, or more than 0.5 million to the people of other Hindus, and 6 from the 47 families, those who have been migrated from the 47 and all that. I mean, this was not the stated objective of the abrogation. This was never there. I mean, you're trying to portray this achievement instead of your own stated claims of economic development, peace and development and everything. And this didn't happen. Politically, it is isolated. People are marginalized. The spaces are reduced. And then, of course, these all things are leading toward a certain situation where the people of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly the local people, will bear the brunt of all these things, because state is trying to corner them and take them to the stage where there will be no other option to them except to resist whatever means they have. So the international community, the international world, the international institutions must think on these lines, that we need not to, and we need to push the relevant governments, particularly the government of India, to allow people to have these political spaces. Otherwise, this is a very alarming situation. Things come and go, but right now the international attention is somewhere else. But it's a very, very precarious situation. We have a long line of control, Kashmir divided on the both sides, and people have sentiments on the other sides as well. They're continuously following the developments over there. So you can't sustain these all sort of measures and tricks for so long. So I guess this would, if not attended well, would lead to certain situation that might not be in our control as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas. You got very important points. One, about the sentiments of the people on the other side of line of control. That's Azad Jammu and Kashmir. They are witnessing. They cannot wait for long and see how the things are happening in other side of the line of control in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And the other thing, that the people are not even allowed to mourn their loved ones from 5th of August 2019 till days. Nearly 500 people who were killed at different incidents. And even the tallest leader of Kashmir, Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, when he died in custody, in custody, was at home, not provided with medical facilities and all these things. He remained in detention in his house for at least 10 years or 11 years. And then the burial was not allowed by the Indian agencies and their forces. And similarly, the great leader, Muhammad Ashraf Sarai, he was in prison. He was not provided the proper medication. He died over there, and then his burial was not allowed. And even those his sons who were there at his burial, they are booked under UAPA, and they are currently in different jails in India. So I will now go to Barrister Nida Salam. We have also been joined by very prominent people, including Iftikhar Gilani Saab, a prominent journalist of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, currently in Turkey. After Nida, I think Iftikhar Gilani Saab is requested for panelists. Nida is a practicing lawyer, so we will know from the law perspective from Nida.
I would like to say thank you to Vanessa for this invitation. It is my privilege to be the part of this panel. As far as genocide is concerned, for the dead and for living, we must be at least witness. Genocide is looming in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I strongly believe that the world community, particularly the United Nations, must break the criminal silence over ruthless killing of Kashmiris and act swiftly to protect them from the Indian brutalities. Indian troops are mercilessly killing innocent Kashmiris every other day. Modi, I strongly consider, is a killer of Muslims and has already committed a Muslim slaughter in the Indian state of Gujarat. Religion differences between victimizers and the victim are a common characteristics of genocide and genocidal massacres. Often the significance of the religious difference is very clear. As in the religious persecutions of the Middle Ages, the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, the Uganda under Amin, or the massacre of the Abos in northern Nigeria, the Rwanda genocide, the world has witnessed, and now which we are expecting a dramatic genocide in occupied Kashmir by India, that I consider next. India may yet try to portray herself as so-called democratic nation because of its very human resource and soft power spread across the globe, but we are witnessing as how this mask is being taken down by the people of conscience. India has until now succeeded in hiding its real basis as a nation, which is based on hate for Muslims and all other Hindus, non-Muslims as well, non-Hindus, Christians, I consider, which seeks to live according to their own faith. The warning recently issued by Genocide Watch President Stanton that something similar to the inhuman Rwanda genocide could happen in occupied Kashmir if stern action was not taken by the government of India. Stanton said a genocide was not an event but a process and drew parallel between the policies persuaded by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the discriminatory policies like it occurred during the Myanmar and Rohingya Muslims in 2017. Among the policies he cited were the revocation of the special autonomous status of the Indian administered Kashmir in 2019, which stripped Kashmiris of the special autonomy they had for 7 decades, and Citizenship Amendment Act. The same year, which granted citizens to religious minorities but excluded Muslims. Stanton said the Hindutva ideology was contrary to the history of India and the Indian constitution, and referred to Modi as an extremist who has taken over the government. Stanton referred back in 1989 and stated that he warned the then Rwanda president, Juvenal, that if you don't do something to prevent genocide in your country, there is going to be genocide here within 5 years. So that his prediction came true later on. I strongly believe that we as a conscious souls cannot let India to do this at any cost. In November last year, Hindu hardliners set fire to the homes of the Muslim former foreign minister Salman Khurshid, which had compared the kind of Hindu nationalism that has flourished under the Modi era and extremist group under the BJP umbrella. Videos of Hindu religious leaders calling for mass killings and for the use of weapons against Muslims that went viral on social media last month prompted the Supreme Court to order an investigation into hate speech in different states of India. So under BJP leadership, India became one of the most dangerous countries for Muslims and Christians in the world. They are being persecuted physically, psychologically, economically. There are clear signs of casual systematic genocide by India For instance, an exclusionary ideology of Hindutva, India as Hindu nation by Modi ruling BJP, authoritarian military rule without legal restraint imposed by civilian Indian officials, rule by a minority military force over majority Muslim citizens, cut off communication and outside access by internet media and trade, widespread violations of basic human rights, torture, rapes, detentions without charge, unlawful arrests, deportations of Muslim political and human rights leaders. So it also listed 10 stages of genocide process, a classification, for instance, Hindu and Sikh Indian Army versus Kashmiri Muslim civilian, symbolization, Muslims have Muslims' names on the identification cards, and language and dress and mask, and they're discriminated by BJP, Modi and his cabinet, and all that. Dehumanization, Muslims are called terrorists, separatists, criminals, insurgents, which is not acceptable anywhere across the globe. Polarization, Modi and the BJP incite anti-Muslim hatred. Social media campaigns spread falsehoods. For that, EU Disinfo Lab, I consider as an example recently, they were exposed across the globe. Denial, Modi and BJP says that the goals are to bring prosperity and to end terrorism and massacres and all that. No Indian army troops or police are very they try torture on the people. How they can claim that they are ending terrorism and massacres and going towards prosperity? I don't think so in any way. Recently, Genocide Watch called upon the United Nations and its members to warn that India is in a breach of bilateral international agreements, human rights, United Nations and conventions and all that. So I urge global leaders to act, not only indict and sanction the Indian government, but to expose it internationally so that crime against humanity can be prevented for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nira, for your contribution. We have a question for the panelists from Iftikhar Gilani, who's a veteran journalist from Indian occupied Kashmir, who has been covering Kashmir and Indian politics since long and has been writing on Kashmir extensively. There's a question that in 2000, the President Clinton, when he visited India, he said that Kashmir is the most dangerous place in the world. And in 2019, when Angela Merkel came to India, she also said the situation in occupied Kashmir cannot be left unattainable. So what are the ways, how can these words of these people, these big people, and there are many examples like this, how can these be translated into actions? How can governments come forward and to make some impact on this, and in order to give people of Kashmir some sort of peace and breathing space? Any of the panelists can answer.
Yeah, I tried to make some sort of an answer on the chat. I mean, India is sort of searching in a way for a role with the way the global situation is changing, and the one thing it doesn't want from the West, from Western democracies, are favourable trade terms and favourable economic treatment, whether that's investment deals, investment in both directions. And so there is an opportunity, there is leverage there to be had if our leaders, our governments in the West were willing to use them. So those of us who live in these Western democracies, I think, need to put pressure on our governments. When our government is possibly a little bit deaf like ours, we need to use our opposition parties. So whether in government or in opposition, we need to mobilize our people to actually take this issue seriously, because there is leverage there, and you can actually get sometimes changes in behavior through that leverage. What we need to do, I mean, I've put forward an amendment for the Liberal International Congress, and that amendment I can speak to in that Congress, largely based on trying to bring India to the table. And this is what the West has to do now. we have to try to bring India to the table and use every lever that we have, and particularly trade levers, to get them there. And only when India is willing to speak and willing to talk about this issue, can we explore a solution. Because at the moment India has a sort of veto because of its just de facto power in this issue, and we have to break that, and we have to see that we have to use the influence of our governments around the world to put trade pressures onto India to try and get them to change and to get them to willingly come forward with at least with a willingness to sit down and talk, so that we can resolve this in the longer term.
Thank you, Phil. Anybody else? Mary?
Yes, I would like to say something. It really matters that the membership nations of the UN Human Rights Council include India, include Russia, which is invading the Ukraine and still bombing Syria, which armed the Rohingya genocide and boasted of its aid to arming the India against the Kashmiris. So Russia is on the Human Rights Council. India is on the Human Rights Council. The United States, which not only arms and bankrolls the Palestinian genocide, but also arms India against the Rohingya, against the Kashmiris, and took a position of not knowing what was going on with the Rohingya. So these nations also, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar are also on the United Nations Human Rights Council. They have no place adjudicating human rights. It makes a mockery of the United Nations and of human rights. And I think that we should really denounce the fact that the United Nations allows that kind of mockery of one of its chief agencies for managing human rights around the world. They have an impressive website, but they haven't done anything for actual genocides or actual human rights violations that I can tell. So I think that we should expose that. And the one thing this isn't fit in here, but I really, some of the young people that they picked up in that nighttime raid after the Yasin Malik sentencing, when they protested, they picked them up for stone pelting because like in Israel, India has elevated stone pelting to a felonious assault. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of young Kashmiris, mostly men, sitting in jails. We don't know their names, for stone pelting. These are civilian defense guards. These are not terrorists. These are not antisocial elements. And I think the Let Kashmir Coalition has decided to prioritize the defense of political prisoners, of Kashmiri political prisoners. And we don't just mean the prominent ones, but the ones like Khurram Parvez, the journalist, or Yasin Malik. We also mean these thousands of young stone pelters and protesters who are unnamed, but are freedom fighters. And we want to prioritize a campaign, an international campaign, to release them immediately. And reparations.
Thank you, Mary. Robert, you want to add something?
Very briefly, I think Mr. Bennion and Ms. Scully have articulated my thoughts quite clearly. I just want to mention that international law exists for a reason, but power and profits always trumps international law. We have to do what we can to make international law as the standard by which countries operate.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you all. I think this sideline event is being observed by the United Nations Human Rights Council and the officers from the Office of the High Commission. Like the Genocide Watch, we would also like to impress upon the UN Human Rights Council to appoint a special rapporteur to investigate anti-Muslim laws and the programs in Indian occupied Kashmir. The Indian government has enacted, and United Nations Security Council should monitor regularly and discuss the conflict of Kashmir and the situation in Kashmir in order to find some ways and means, as Iftikhar Gilani in his question said, that to provide some sort of breathing space for the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. I thank you all for your time. The short notes, I send you invitations and you are there. Thank you very much, Man Security. Thank you very much, Belbelen. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Barrister Nida. Thank you, Dr. Said, Council, and all those who participants who joined us on this webinar. With this, I conclude this webinar. Goodbye to all of you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
See you
you.
next
very
time.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Yes.